Catie Hodge. I am a current PhD student at the University of Northern Colorado. I study social psychology of sport and exercise, which basically means I'm very interested in like social interactions that happen in the sport experience. So like coach-athlete relationships, parent-athlete relationships, how that impacts psychosocial outcomes, health and well-being. So today, first I wanted to thank you for being here. And I also wanted to congratulate you for being here, because showing up to something like this isn't quite always the easiest thing to do with very busy schedules, especially if you have athletes who are very competitive. My parents would never have time to show up to something like this. So congrats and thank you for being here, because this isn't a very easy thing to show up for. So quick agenda so you know what we're talking about today. Introductions, I want to introduce myself, sport and education background, but then I also want to know who's here so I can get a gauge on like parent, coaches, ages of athletes, etc., so that I can like tailor this to your needs. But essentially we're going to talk about three different up there, trends. I cut the last one out, but we probably will still talk about it. It was just too much slides. So sport professionalization, sport specialization, and then the great sport myth we'll touch on probably once we get to the handout. So everybody has this handout, and the mini one is for feedback that goes to me. So it can be anonymous, or you can put your name on it if you want me to reach back out to you, like to answer questions. But I would love feedback, because this is our first one. Hopefully I'll do another one, maybe two more. But I'd like to do that for your interests. So if you have concerns about something that's happening in your sport experience, hopefully we can chat about it in the future. So trends we'll get through, and then risks that come with those trends, and then how can we as parents navigate or mitigate those risks that we might experience. And also, if you have any questions at any time, feel free, because we are going to try and make this a little bit more discussion-based rather than me just talking at you the whole time. So sport background, I was a very high-level competitive gymnast for 15 years. I grew up in a very competitive gym. It was mentally and emotionally abusive. And that was for about 13, 14 years of my experience, and then I switched gyms towards the end to a different one. But ultimately, my last 2 years of gymnastics was back-to-back injuries. So I had a really bad head concussion, took me out of school, gymnastics for 6 months to a year. And then I had 2 knee surgeries, sprained ankles, etc. So I switched, decided to retire from gymnastics, switched to diving, which is a common thing to happen for gymnasts because we still want to flip, but it's a little bit less intensive. Switched to diving. I didn't do it for very long, but I was being recruited for some college diving. Went down the East Coast, a little bit towards West Coast, and everything was great, but I realized that they wanted me to do high diving, and I'm actually afraid of heights and had no experience. So it wasn't going to go very well. So I decided to just be a normal college student. So then I had gymnastics head coach, team director for 4 years while going through undergraduate education. So I was still coaching gymnastics and being around it. But essentially my gymnastics experience pushed me towards psychology because I saw a lot of negative outcomes from the coaching styles that we were surrounded by. So that pushed me towards wanting to understand what happens to athletes when we experience stuff like that. So I got my bachelor's at Miami University in Ohio in psychology, and then my master's in kinesiology and health. Essentially, it's like sports psychology, but it doesn't make you a sports psychologist. But I wanted a little bit more. So I took a gap year, and then I came out here to University of Northern Colorado for social psychology of sport. So that's me. I wanted to get to know you guys. Jen, do you want to start us off?
Sure.
Sport parent, age?
Sport parent, 6 and 9.
Okay.
So we're just beginning.
Yeah.
So my daughter is getting into gymnastics.
Love that.
She's excited. She does volleyball, trying out basketball, and then my son has tried soccer, and basketball and football.
Sweet.
So, yeah.
A good mix.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Robert, sport parent as well. We've got an 18-year-old dancer, a 16-year-old tennis player, a 14-year-old tennis, football, soccer, and all the stuff.
Yeah.
And then I also run tennis programs in town as well.
Awesome. So like high school mostly now?
Yeah,
Cool.
coach at the high school, and then I also am the director of tennis and pickleball at the country club.
Perfect. I have still yet to play pickleball. It's becoming very common out here. So
Yeah.
hopefully eventually we'll be able to. Thank you.
I'm Kate. I am also a sport parent.
Yeah.
I have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. Both boys, both love sports. We've kind of done everything right now. We're doing football, we're getting ready for basketball. They love wrestling. We play travel baseball. So kind of everything they like to do. They've done some sport classes and then some other strength and conditioning classes. So we have done a lot of stuff. I coach CrossFit and also do some coaching with kids programs as a me. I just got done as being a coach for flag football. For example, I helped coach baseball for my son's team last year. So kind of dabble
A lot.
in a lot of things.
Yeah. Awesome. Sweet. And that was, you said 11-ish?
I have an 11,
Okay.
an 11-year-old. Yeah.
Okay.
My name's Lindsay. I have an 11-year-old daughter who, I was going to use the word dabble too. She's dabbled in
Dabbled.
dance and gymnastics.
Yeah.
She did volleyball this year, loved it. I'm not a very competitive child, so I'm kind of a sport parent.
Okay.
But I'm a physical
You're in the
therapist.
experience.
Yes. A physical therapist, so I was here more in that capacity than a
Okay. Perfect.
parent.
Sweet.
My name is Brent. We have a 13-year-old boy who started in mini sports.
Mhm.
Now we're down to 2, and he's doing both of those pretty much year round with a month or 2 off for each of them.
Yeah.
Or at least it gets very light.
Mhm.
When we're feeling pressure to neck down to 1,
Mhm.
but we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Because I want him to play 2 sports because he's good at 2 sports. So
Cool.
we got him in sports for social since he goes to a small private school,
Mhm.
and it's definitely been that. But then he showed talent, so we're high level in both these 2 sports.
Which-
wrestling and baseball.
Okay. Awesome. And how old?
13.
13. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about specializing and get into the issues that come with that. But thank you for sharing. That helps a little bit narrow it down. So first topic is a very broad one, sport professionalization. So this is a trend that we're seeing in research. It's kind of difficult to give you a very clear and concise definition because there really isn't one. So I kind of culminated a mixture of different studies. But essentially, this picture is a great representation of what we're seeing. Sport professionalization is treating young athletes like pro athletes. So we're training them very high number hours per week, very high level skill, 24/7 year round. So treating them and training them as though they're already a professional athlete. There's a lot of issues that come with that, but essentially we are placing adult values onto child athletes. So heavy importance on success. Holly, come on in. Heavy importance on success and expectations for success. A lot of pressures coming from adult authority figures and placing them on children. So early elementary school, middle school, training high levels. So we're placing these adult values onto young children. This is actually the article that first introduced sport professionalization to me. It's actually a Time article, but it details how there's been a shift from youth sport being playful and participatory to capitalism, a enterprise. So how can we make money off of kids participating in youth sport? So it details this athlete. I believe he's probably a senior now because this was in 2017. Thankfully, he is still playing baseball, but it details how there's a heavy financial burden for sport parent athletes, and travel costs, medical costs, etc. Very high expectations for parents, and it details as well issues that are coming up for sport parents. Medical costs. We're having a lot of expectations from coaches to participate in one sport year round. We're going to see a lot of overuse injuries, which we'll get into in a second. But the expectations are coming from outside sources, or they could be coming from within the family. A lot of times we specialize or we're being professional youth athletes because the goal is maybe college scholarship or professional athlete down the road. So we're trying to get a head start, and we're treating young athletes like pro athletes. Ways that this can manifest, year-round training, there's no off-season for a sport. So even though baseball is typically like a spring sport, we're playing baseball year-round, even though we're not competing. Private lessons, intense training schedules, child social media pages is a big boom right now. It's very common with gymnastics to have an Instagram page dedicated to an athlete for recruiting purposes. So you'll have like your full name, Catie Hodge 2026 is your username, and then you upload videos to the public, hoping that people see them and can recruit you as you age up to the appropriate age for recruiting. Heavy expectations for early success, very, very large financial commitments for parents. So I wanted to ask you guys as sport parents if we've experienced these kind of things, or if we have examples of how sport has kind of become a professional job for young athletes. Have we had any of these experiences? Not yet.
Well, I mean, we, pay to play competition with baseball, and then just this year for football, and both are well over $1,000. And then, not so much for football, but for baseball, I mean, that'll start in January, it goes through, almost end of July. And then even right now, like on Mondays, we don't have school at our school. And so there's a group of them that we have like a small group lesson with the facility at DCATS, and, just to kind of like keep, just getting reps in and that type of thing. So I can see it, but I've seen, my kids don't have social media pages or anything, but I have seen child athlete media pages, especially track and field. That's where I've seen it a lot. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of online websites as well that like stat tracking. I've seen one for baseball, and they, as young as like 7 years old, are tracking stats like that.
I've seen stat tracking also for baseball. And baseball here, and I'm starting to find, because we're just getting into the wrestling world, is also pretty intense.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that.
Yeah. Any others?
I haven't experienced that, but what I'm wondering because of this, so my daughter's in 6th grade, just did her first volleyball season, absolutely loved it. So since she hasn't been doing club volleyball and all the competitive stuff, when she gets to high school, if she wants to play, is she even gonna be able to make a team? Because everyone else has been doing this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That'll come up
Oh,
in a few sites. Yes. No, that is a thing. Barriers kind of keeping us out, because so many people, it's so common to be a pro athlete at a young age, creates barriers for those who weren't sports specializing, which is our next topic, which is why we'll talk about it in a minute. Good. Any others?
From the tennis perspective on it, we have a lot of folks who join up and start in the group lessons, and then the parents, want Susie to have, more work on her serve, and so they'll sign up for private lessons. I see it coming from the parents. I don't really see Susie saying, I want, private lessons for serves. It's more coming from a parent's observation standpoint, in my view of that. And, they saw their match and they didn't like their backhand, so we gotta go get, some private lessons for that. So I do certainly see that take place.
Yeah, that's very common. I grew up, I would have a private lesson every Sunday for several years. So it's becoming more common for that, and that gets at the financial burden and the enterprise of youth sport that we're starting to see. Let me flip real quick. We'll do risks first. Okay, so with sport professionalization, so while we're treating athletes at a young age as they're professionals already, we're gonna see a lot of physical and mental negative outcomes. So with the physical side, a lot of it is mostly overuse injury. So if we're training one sport year round, or maybe we are doing multiple sports, but we're doing it year round, we're gonna have a lot of overuse things. So example would be one person plays baseball in the spring, football in the fall. One person plays baseball year round. Training baseball, swinging bat throwing a ball, we're going to have a lot of strain on our joints. Whereas if we switched from baseball to football, we're still being physically active, we're still training well year round, but we're switching up the motor movements that we're using. So we're going to have a decreased risk of overuse injuries, stress fractures, tendonitis, ACL tears, Tommy John surgery at 10 years old. That is becoming a lot more common now. ACL surgery that young. There was a video I showed in my class, and I think it was a 10-year-old, and he was detailing how it's very common and it's becoming so normal to perform surgeries like that because of sport professionalization. And we're training so hard at such a young age. On the mental side, we're going to have a lot of burnout, a decrease in motivation. Amotivation is like a lack of motivation. So we just are like indifferent towards our sport participation anymore. High levels of performance anxiety or fear of failure. So if we have so much pressure on these athletes, goes hand in hand with perfectionism. If we have a high amount of pressure on them, they're going to develop these negative psychosocial outcomes. And they're going to be afraid of making very tiny mistakes. So maybe, I always use gymnastics examples in my class, and I'm sure my students don't enjoy that, but you go to a meet and you're on the balance beam and you always make your back handspring, but at the meet you fell on the back handspring. It's not the end of the world, but the athlete treats it as if it's the end of the world because there's so much pressure at a young age. They're not fully developed to handle this kind of pressure. Increases in depression, and then heavy athletic identity is one that I love talking about. So when somebody is part of a sport for a very, very long time, that sport becomes part of who they are. So they define themselves as a soccer player, a baseball player, or a gymnast. So ultimately, if we are in a sport professionalized industry, which we are, likely we're going to have these kind of injuries. Likely we're going to have a career-ending injury early on before we can even get to college. With that, we're probably going to have to leave that sport because in America, usually we go from an athlete to a spectator. There's not as much access, maybe in other countries, to having lifelong pursuit of sport. So we have this shift of being an athlete to a spectator. And that's a very, very difficult transition to make if we have such a strong tie to that sport. So we're going to see a lot of these negative issues come out. The next slide is for us to discuss, but I want to leave these on there. Have we had any experiences with these so far? Yes?
I mean, I can say personally, because I played volleyball. I actually didn't get too serious until sophomore year of high school. So at least 25 years ago, there was hope, right? I don't know now. I know the kids are way earlier with club. But I had a career-ending injury when I was after my freshman season. And it was probably the hardest thing of my life. Because I absolutely athletics was my identity. And I didn't build any other parts of myself, so and it still hurts, that was what paid for college, right? So yeah, very hard.
Yeah, that's a common experience, especially when we're so into sports at a young age.
Yeah.
Any others?
Yeah, I think I can totally relate. Just having always done something athletic my whole life, like that's who I was growing up all the way through college. And then when college was done, I kind of like lost myself a little bit. And then I kind of stumbled into CrossFit, and then now that's like my new thing. So I think I like just found it, I don't know, but it's still like an athletic identity. So I would definitely say it's still, I don't know. There's a whole thing probably to unwrap there, but but I really did struggle with it, and so I think that's why I'm still so drawn to it. It's interesting.
I think CrossFit is a common pathway to take. It was either that or Orange Theory. Do they have that out here?
Yeah.
Orange Theory was a big thing because I was so used to having a coach tell me what to do. When I left sport, I didn't know how to train without a coach. So that was like an outlet to have.
Yeah.
It was like a way to transition a little bit easier. Good. Any others?
We see the perfectionism one.
Yeah.
Where, the match just started and they hit it into the net and like their whole
Immediately.
mental game is blown for the rest of the setting. And it's just really that perfectionism we're seeing in some of these kiddos that have been, training that hard and then just one little misstep or a strikeout or something like that, they're done.
We see a lot of kids around us. Their bodies, their muscles are stronger than their bodies.
Yeah.
And so they're tearing their bodies apart with their muscles,
Yeah, because they're so young
and
and
they're still growing.
yeah.
We see that a lot in wrestling. Well, actually, in baseball too. We see the same thing in baseball.
Yeah.
I was looking at the list on the right. We must be doing something right because I don't think we've hit any of those.
On the mental side,
Yeah.
yeah, that's good. It's normally my example for like the burnout one to translate to parents is if you're in a job for however many years you've been in and you get no vacation, no PTO, you don't ever take a break, all you do is work, you're going to get burnt out, lose interest, not be motivated. Same thing happens for kids when we're in sports. If we're in one sport or like two sports year round for a very long time, it's likely that we're probably going to see some lack of interest or a decrease in interest at least, which we'll get into a way to mitigate that risk with our handout towards the end. Any other before we move?
Professionally, I've seen the overuse in teenage athletes.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's very unfortunate. Okay, so our next one, sports specialization. I think these go really hand in hand. But this one has a little bit more of a clear definition. So it's intense year-round training for one sport, no breaks, no time off, and it's usually children, early elementary, middle school ages. So we're only playing baseball year-round, or we're only playing soccer year-round. So we're specializing in the sport at a young age, and typically the reason behind that is in hopes of college scholarship or future athletic success. And the idea behind specializing, whether it's parents or athletes that are determining it, is hopefully if I get an early start, I can beat everybody else that is playing multi-sports right now, and I'm going to have a head start. When in reality, there's actually research that shows playing multiple sports at an early age is actually more beneficial for athletic success later down the road. So what this can look like, playing one sport year-round at 10 years old. Travel league, so travel baseball, I think you had mentioned, that's a specialization outcome. Usually if we're specializing at that young age, we're being very talented and we're able to compete at a high level at an early age. So then we're traveling out of state, across the country, sometimes even international competitions. So overall, we're going to see a lot of overuse injuries at a young age because we're specializing in one sport. Back to the baseball and football versus somebody who plays it baseball year-round. Because we're doing the same motor movements year-round, we're going to have a lot of overuse, elbows, knees, shoulders, etc. So risks that come with this, whoa. Okay, we're good. Because we're increasing our training, the number of hours and the skill that we're training at, we're going to have an increase in overuse injury, increase in burnout risk, dropout rates, and this is where that barrier that you had mentioned earlier comes in. If we're specializing at an early age, maybe we play baseball from 4 years old to late middle school, and then we're getting burnt out of baseball and high school's coming around, maybe want to try basketball. We might have a barrier psychologically or literally. Psychologically being, well, everybody else has already been playing basketball before, and I don't want to embarrass myself going out in tryouts when everybody else has been playing basketball for years. So that's a psychological barrier, but there could also be coaches out there that say, you can't make the cut because everybody else has experience already. So when we're specializing, could potentially see some barriers down the road. So have we had any kind of sports specialization negative outcomes come up in experience? No?
Basketball.
You personally did?
Yeah, because I started early. It was good,
Mhm.
but by freshman year, I made varsity, and then I was like, meh, like I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. And then did you feel the psychological barrier of not moving to other sports?
Not too much, because I had dabbled with lots of other sports,
Yeah.
and I was like, yeah, volleyball, that kind of worked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm tall, let's try it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and obviously did okay with it, but,
Mhm.
yeah, getting pushed early was not probably the best.
No.
In the sport, so.
Yeah. The love for the sport can definitely decrease as you go down your career. Any other experiences?
We have the since we're narrowed it down to two.
Yeah.
Like our boy he'd be great at tennis, he'd be great at lacrosse. He wants to run track and cross country, and we still may do that. And we may get back into football once maybe he's a junior in high school, senior in high school. But it's like we can hardly find time because we've got practices.
Yeah.
We have so many things to squeeze another sport in, even the one that would just be social for fun, like track and cross country. We can't do it.
Yeah, it's
So
very
we're
difficult.
kind of like, we got enough sports with two, right? So, well, he golfs too in summer, but it's like enough.
Yeah.
Even though he'd be good at other things, it's so crazy competitive that if you're gonna, you'd have to drop the two he's really good at to be able to do the others.
Yeah. And did you say earlier you had like pressures from coach to specialize as well?
Well, some pressure.
Yeah.
We haven't experienced lots of pressure, but we know that if he would specialize, he could be really good in one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
We're not willing to, like for instance, to be a state champion at wrestling takes everything, not just from the kid, but from the family.
Mm-hmm.
From the time that kid's 3 till they win their state championship, and you still might not.
Yeah.
It takes everything: financial, travel, the right coaches. We're not willing to give it that because it takes everything.
Yeah.
And there's families, there's lines of families willing to do that, and they're giving it everything, and their kid, only one wins in each weight bracket each year, so it's tough.
Yeah. And those giving everything is a result of that professionalization of sports. It's a trend, so everybody has to participate if we want to be a state champ, because that's what everybody's doing.
It's a whole family deal.
Yeah, it's definitely a full commitment. Yeah. So we talked a lot about some negative things that can come with these trends. So I want to give you some hope. So we'll talk through this pamphlet a little bit. So the first one, participating in multiple sports. So there's a lot of research that says participating in multiple sports is actually beneficial for lifelong physical activity, later on athletic success, building good, strong motor skills. Whereas if we're playing one sport, we're only developing the motor skills for that one sport. So if we're playing multiple sports, we're going to have a lot of positive outcomes at play. So I want to detail some recommendations for multiple sport, or if you are specializing, because it's not the end of the world if you are specializing. Some recommendations to kind of keep in mind. So one is children should not be practicing more than the amount of years old that they are. So if they're 10 years old, they shouldn't be practicing more than 10 hours a week with whatever sport, if it's multiple or not, adding them all up. It shouldn't exceed their years and age. A second one is that they should have 1 to 2 days off a week to just rest and recover. I feel like it should be at least 2 days because that's the weekend kind of for adults. So I would strive for 2 or more, but the recommendation is 1 to 2. And then if we are playing one sport, the recommendation is not to play that one sport more than 8 months in a year. So maybe do that season and then transition to a different sport for the off season. So we're still being physically active, we're just giving a little bit more variety. Second one, prioritizing fun and development. So my example here from a sport parent perspective, if your athlete does track, I don't know the times for track, but if they run a race and they do it in 20 seconds, first competition, awesome, fantastic. Maybe that was like their personal record. And then the next competition, maybe they do it in 19 seconds, but they still lost. The kid might be very devastated that they lost, but as parents, we can advocate and put the emphasis on development. So you improved your score. You knocked off a second in your time. So we're trying to bring their perspective from winning to self-improvement. So prioritizing that and prioritizing fun and enjoyment in sport participation. Third one, monitoring physical and mental health. So being aware, this one kind of goes with the bottom one as well, communicating with coaches. The whole purpose of this educational talk is for you to become aware of things that are going on in sport. Showing up today to listen to me talk to you was a fantastic first step. So being aware of things that are going on in the sport, monitoring how your athlete is feeling as well, mentally, psychologically, and their physical body. Communicating with coaches, it is very easy. Here's the third trend that comes up, the great sport myth. So let me back up real quick. The great sport myth is relatively new. It was developed in 2015, but it's the assumption that sport is inherently good and pure just by itself. So if I participate in sport, it's going to build good character. So the belief that just being around sport or in sport, we're going to get good things out of it. Essentially, because of that belief, therefore, we shouldn't be conscious or aware of things happening in sport. We shouldn't study sport. We shouldn't analyze or think critically about what's going on because sport is good and pure. So because of that belief, a lot of times progress in sport is very slow because people don't think that we need to change anything. But because of that belief, as parents, coaches, whoever is spectating, we kind of take a hands-off approach with our sport experience and we let whatever's happening in the sport environment just happen. So if the coach is yelling at a kid, maybe that's just how sport goes. Maybe it's fine because we believe that sport is pure and good. So because of that belief and that myth that's happening, oftentimes we're going to see misconduct, abuse, neglect of children and athletes because we're taking a hands-off approach. We're letting sport play out how it plays. So I encourage you to be conscious of the myth and the trends that we talked about and to be aware of the possibilities of risks for your athletes. Be in communication with the coaches. I know it's very, very hard to attend a practice. Oftentimes my parents would drop me off and then they'd come pick me up 4 or 6 hours later because everybody's busy. So it's really hard to go and sit in on a practice. But I would encourage you maybe once a month to go in and sit through a practice, hear how the coaches are talking, how are the athletes reacting, how is the environment playing out. See if the values that are at play within the sport environment match with your family values. Do I appreciate how my athlete is being spoken to or talked to? Do I appreciate how the company is run, the organization? How do the coaches interact with one another? So being aware, being present is a really good step to make sure that we're not seeing any kind of abuse, misconduct. This little guy down here, a little sweaty guy. Be supportive, avoiding pressuring athletes. So I'm hoping that my next talk can be about motivation, because motivation is a very complex topic, and I took a semester-long class on motivation, and we didn't even cover everything within it. So it's very difficult, but I'm going to give you a really quick spiel of motivation. So essentially, for motivation, there is intrinsic motivation, or like internal. There's extrinsic motivation, or outside of the self. And then there's amotivation, which we talked about as like the lack of motivation. So when we have external motivation, so I am a soccer player because my parents want me to, or my coaches want me to, or I don't want to disappoint anybody. All of those reasons for being a soccer player are external. So that's extrinsic. So when we are participating in something for external reasons, we're likely going to have a lot of burnout, decreases in motivation, not wanting to continue with that sport, because the reasons for participating are from outside of the self. Whereas if we were doing intrinsic motivation, it's I enjoy being a soccer player. I define myself as a soccer player. I value being a soccer player. Those are internal factors. So if we shift from external to internal, we're going to see a lot more positive outcomes. And we're going to feel more enjoyment with the sport. So when we're being supportive and not pressuring athletes as parents, trying to get your athlete to participate for the internal reasons are going to be a lot more beneficial than because my coaches want me to, or I don't want to disappoint my teammates, parents, etc. So trying to help them move towards the intrinsic would be the goal, or the internal. And then the last one, monitoring the sport environment. Kind of what you're already doing now, learning about things that are happening in sport, being aware of trends or risks that come with participating in sport, and helping your athlete navigate those in a safe way. Ultimately, their health and well-being is at the forefront. Do we have any questions or experiences with these, or difficulties trying to do these things with our athletes? I know trying to talk to your high school athletes can be really difficult. How was practice? It was fine. It was good. That's all you get. So I totally get that this can be really hard, especially as a parent, trying to approach your athlete. So do we have any questions?
Yeah, I have a
Concerns?
question about the motivation.
Yeah.
Of course, every parent pushes their kid to a certain extent, hoping that someday the kid will become 100% intrinsically motivated. Not as a trick, but what things help a kid to pick the things they want out of the sport, so that they can be intrinsically motivated?
Well, to start, it is very, very difficult to participate in something just for intrinsic motivation. It's like very uncommon to only participate in something that is just because I enjoy doing it. So it's not common to only participate based on enjoyment. It's normal to have some intrinsic and some extrinsic, because it's like a spectrum. So there's different levels across the spectrum. But to help try and get them to the internal side is a good goal. And to get your athlete there from a sport parent perspective, I think the first step is going to be determining where they are on that spectrum. And if some of the external pressures are coming from you as a parent, to try and say, I don't want to put those pressures on you. Like, that's not my intention. And like having a conversation through that could be beneficial. And then if they have pressures from the coach or from like the goal of getting a scholarship, trying to have a conversation about those and say that shouldn't be the only reason why we're participating in sport, and trying to get them to shift on their own, which is hard, but towards the internal would be of benefit. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, what we've found is sometimes just backing off is the best way.
Yeah.
It's like the hardest thing to
Yeah.
do, but just back off and let them do it.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have to be more into it, you know.
Yes, and that's another piece, hopefully,
It's hard.
with motivation, the next talk, that gets at another piece of motivation. There's 3 basics. I feel like I'm talking to my students. 3 basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And autonomy is where you give them choice. So if you allow them choice in what they participate in, that's going to help them move towards internal motivation. So having them, giving them choice in the activities that they participate in. Competence is to feel skillful in what you're doing. So to communicate, you're doing a great job, I think you're very talented, etc. And getting some feedback from coaches as well can help fulfill that. And then relatedness is feeling connected to whoever's in the environment. So feeling connected to their teammates or their friends, coaches, etc. Helping them be in an environment that allows those to thrive is going to help them move towards internal motivation. It's a very quick word vomit of all of that. So hopefully next talk we can talk about motivation in more detail.
Perfect. That's great.
Awesome. Any other questions, concerns?
I think from the tennis kiddos, what we do in the beginning of the season is we'll sit them down and I have them write down on a sticky note, like, tell me what your goal
Mhm.
for the next week is going to be, and they, hand it to me. And so I make them do it twice, one for them and one for me, so that I've got that. And
Yeah.
so when they've done it, they can come back to me and hand it to me, and we'll scratch it off, and they go get their next goal, whether it's, get
Yeah.
no double faults this match or whatever it might be. That's how small I want it to be, but that puts it on them to, like, what do I want to get better at? And so that I, as a coach, also can be like, okay, I can kind of cater some of this training or focus or this lesson on what they're looking for.
Yeah, goal setting is a great tool to help with motivation. And from a coach perspective, it really helps kind of enlighten you why the athletes are there.
Yeah.
And from a parent perspective, it can help you figure out why your athlete is actually participating in sport. In my experience, because when I was a coach, I think my youngest was like 8 years old and my oldest was over 18. And none of them knew how to goal set like appropriately. So we had to do a workshop on what is a goal? How do we set goals? What's a realistic goal? What's a too big of a goal? How can we narrow it down? Like an achievable goal. So if they don't know how to set goals, that's problematic and with their motivation. So helping them try and figure out what their goals are, their reasons and motivations for participating are a great first step to try and help.
What's your take on, so I've coached on some teams where parents are, paying, but like rewarding their kids for, like, say, they get an interception in the game, then they get,
A prize?
yes, like most recently, like somebody got a touchdown and he's like, I'm gonna get some easy slides or whatever it was,
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, and my kid's like, what do I get? And I'm like,
Nothing.
we can go out to eat or something.
Yeah.
I'm like, aren't you excited that you guys won and did so well? But like, what are your thoughts on that? Like benefits, not benefits, somewhere kind of in the middle? I'm just curious because I've seen it happen more and more, I think, just over the last year or two in all different sports.
Yeah.
Not just one, but so.
Yeah, we had a lot of that growing up as well. And that goes back to motivation. It's an external reward. So a prize or like a dinner or like a team sleepover, those are external rewards. So that's extrinsic motivation, which works for some people. Sometimes it doesn't work for others. Because when we're on the continuum, some people like external rewards and sometimes that works. But if you remember, if we're heavy on external rewards, we're going to have more likely to lose motivation or we're going to get burnt out because the reason we're participating is outside of ourselves. So the goal would be, like, those are okay occasionally, but the goal would be to be more internal rewards, self-improvement, enjoyment, stuff that they control and that they're proud of would be the ideal prize. Yeah. Great question though. Any others? Okay, well, that's all I have. Oh, I do have a slide though with so that's my email, catie.hodge@unco.edu. I would love if you could do this feedback, what you liked, disliked, any topics that you would be interested in learning more about. It sounds like motivation would probably be a good one to talk about. But any other thoughts and suggestions? And then if you do complete it, you can turn it back up here. If you have a specific question that you want me to respond to later on, you could put your contact info and I could email later. But it can remain anonymous if you want.